question of taxation touches every home in America.
Cutting through the static of the tax world, it's Simply Tax. Brought to you by BKD CPAs and Advisors. Everyone needs a trusted advisor. Who's yours? Now here's your host, Damien Martin.
On the podcast today, I sit down with Jack Thurman, the president of BKD Wealth Advisors and BKD Family Office, to take on a complicated area where tax often plays a significant role that can be difficult to define, much like the topic of a trade or business that we talked about on previous episode 64 of the podcast, and that's the family office. Today, Jack helps us simplify the complexities of what a family office is and does, explains the roles they can serve, covers some best practices for family offices, and even shares how he came to work with affluent families. Now, before we set off to start navigating the complex world of family offices, I wanted to share a little bit more on Jack. In addition to being focused on serving high net worth families, he's been recognized as an outstanding figure in his community of Springfield, Missouri. He's been known to climb tall mountains and rappel off of buildings for a charity or two, and he's the proud father of 3 daughters. And speaking of tall mountains, before we ascend and explore the mountain of what a family office is, let's start at the beginning with how Jack defines what a family office is in the first place.
Something that gets thrown around a lot, I'd almost want to say it's an enigma in a lot of ways, is the family office. So maybe we just start right there and, what is a family office? How do you define a family office?
If people even know what the term, have ever even heard of the term, they usually can't get their arms around it and say, what is it? Oh, yeah, wealthy people, wealthy families have these. The Rockefellers or the Rothschilds over in Europe, they might have a family office. But believe it or not, there are numerous business owners or second, third generation, multi-generational families that have a family office. Some of them probably don't look like a building and several offices, but it's a group of so-called attorneys, or it might be one attorney, one CPA, that's taking care of the family's business beyond the business. So basically, it's really hard to define, because one family may say, hey, it's one administrative assistant taking care of the checkbook for the owner of the business. Somewhere else, it might be a CPA that's doing all the tax work for a family. Mm-hmm. And then another one may be, hey, somebody's taking care of the jet schedule for the family. So it's really, the phraseology in the industry, a really small niche of the wealth management business is, if you've seen one family office, you've only seen one family office, because they're so customized. So, from a standpoint of what a true definition or a more consistent definition would be, is a formal or informal organization or structure that takes care of multi-generational wealth for a family to assist them in successfully transitioning that wealth from one generation to the other, or to a charitable organization. So it's really helping the family transition that wealth from one generation to the other, or to a charitable organization, or to both.
So you mentioned business, which a lot of times I know in your practice, I know that you've worked with a lot of business owners or previous business owners that maybe that made their wealth in that family. So maybe what you're talking about is the business rather side of the family, because there's a lot of things that can be, and maybe it depends on what each family needs.
Yeah, quite often it is a family business that has grown through the years, and the comptroller, the CFO, has been taking care of the patriarch's wealth along with the business wealth. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, there's an awkward moment in time. There may be a transaction of the business, or maybe another family member that gets more involved in the business, and they have to kind of extricate it. So for a while, it's a embedded family office within the family business. And as time goes along, or things happen in the business or the family, they become more intentional, or a true family office where it's extricated from the business.
I've seen that quite a bit working with family businesses, and that's sometimes maybe that gets back to that whole enigma and that whole, challenge of defining it, because it's going to look different depending on where you are, phase of business, phase of family. Do you
how
have the
big
heirs?
the family is? Is it two brothers or two sisters that ran the business, and when one family branch is maybe selling out or something, or because of death or health issues, they're no longer as active. Also, it's not just focused on family businesses. It can be entertainers or athletes, et cetera.
Sure.
And we've seen family offices. Matter of fact, in Hollywood, there's a whole lot of family offices for entertainers because they're traveling, et cetera. So
maybe they've accumulated some wealth, they've grown wealth, or they've inherited wealth, but maybe they're short on time. So maybe wealth in the traditional sense, right? But maybe poor on time. Maybe you could say so. They're using the office, the family office, then to help do that. So, what are some ways that a family office can help benefit a family or an individual?
The simple purpose of a family office, beyond just the successful transition, is to simplify the complex. When you have multi-generational wealth, which probably is defined as $50 million and above, and some of that's liquid, some of it's illiquid, or maybe it's all illiquid, or maybe it's all liquid. It may be a combination, but net worth of about $50 million. And the family office's true objective is to simplify the complex for current generation and future generations. And if you think about it, tax returns are complex. Well, now you are in a high tax bracket. You may have income from numerous states. And oh yeah, by the way, you have an estate plan that is trying to successfully transition that wealth into future generations or charitable causes. So their tax returns are complex. And oh yeah, by the way, they're integrating that with their attorney, and now they have numerous children. So what we try to do is help coordinate that simplification among all the team members, the family members, multiple generations, as well as the CPAs, the attorneys, the bankers that may have debt for their business or their personal lives. And before you know it, the family office literally is supposed to simplify the complex for those families, as you just mentioned, to help them maximize on their minimal time at times.
Yeah, I like that, the simplify the complex. That really resonates, right? And again, different people have different levels of comfort with complexity, I suppose, too, right? Yeah. So how do you know then, if as an individual or a family, if a family office would be a good fit for you?
If you're getting, to a certain extent, frustrated because your CPA and your attorneys are not coordinating, the family office would help basically bring these parties together. Or, hey, you've got a generation that may not be involved in the business, and they're doing other things, but yet their tax returns are coming from income, coming from maybe their shares in the company or their estate plan. And before you know it, it's this disjointedness. A family office literally is supposed to be, to a certain extent, the conductor of the symphony of all your players within your family.
You're speaking my language now. I studied music, right? Yeah. So that really brings it. I
mean, if you think about it, a great flute player and a great cellist and a percussionist, they're all great in their own ways. But if they're not coordinated together, it becomes discord.
Right.
So I believe that a family office, their whole reason for being is to coordinate all this so that successful transition of wealth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you mentioned too kind of with the family businesses, the executives in the business sometimes take on that role and do some of those things, maybe playing the conductor while also conducting the business.
Exactly.
Right? What are ways, if let's just say you are one of those executives and you want to maybe explore this because you think it would be beneficial to the ownership group, or maybe it's just becoming so complex for you as the executive that in managing the day-to-day of the business. What are some tips maybe that you have for that executive in doing that?
I would say it's really basic, is understanding what are you trying to do with the wealth? What are your objectives? And quiet time on a beach or on a mountain slope or whatever, and say, what am I trying to achieve? Because too often business owners or entertainers, whomever they may be, are so busy in the business of what made their wealth, right, that they're not sitting back and saying, what do I want my legacy to be to my kids? And not just your financial legacy, but the legacy, what do I want my kids to know about me and my wife, or my wife and my husband, et cetera, so that this transcends just me making money. It really transcends into what's the legacy. And it may not just be the legacy in your family, legacy within your business, legacy within the community. and charitable causes that you may be connected to. So it's sitting back and saying, what do I want to achieve? And now you then bring in somebody to help coordinate that. To a certain extent, it's Bach saying, what do I want to achieve with a piece? And then you have a conductor really to bring all that together once you've written the music.
What are some of the financial roles, let's say, because it kind of two buckets I'm hearing you say. There's some financial and maybe some non-financial roles. What are some of those financial ways that the family office can help?
With tax reform coming through over the last year is making sure that the CPA, whether it be in-house or external, is truly understanding what is the benefits as well as the detriments of tax reform for that family. And not just the matriarch, patriarch, but for the multi-generations. And any strategies that can alleviate, mitigate excessive tax, as well as then making sure that, once again, that the CPAs and the family members are all making sure that things are happening the way they're supposed to happen, not just theoretical execution. And then making sure that, by the way, that attorney is making sure that he's writing the document so that upon the death of one of these family members, that does mitigate tax liability as much as possible. So financial, we think of family offices as financial, but it's also, there's a lot of other soft issues. But the key tangible part of it is managing the wealth and then managing the taxes, managing the estate planning. There's probably the three biggest components. Debt would be part of it, but there's a whole lot of family offices that have no debt whatsoever, or minimal debt.
And maybe going back to even that concept of a person that's generating the wealth, let's say the patriarch, the family, has minimal time, and sometimes you get running so fast that it's hard to stop and even think about, well, what do I want to do with my wealth? Are those ways that a family office can help as well? And maybe other ways that you can, you've seen those that have done that well, that they've executed on that?
It's interesting. There's nothing a family office really couldn't be doing, shouldn't be doing, as long as it's legal, from my standpoint. So there's a lot of things. There's literally no holds barred. I have one family office I work with that does everything for the family. And it's, a sizable staff of, say, 20. That's a very large family office in all truthfulness. But I also have a ultra affluent family, very, very wealthy, and it's one CPA doing everything from making sure that the right hunting gear is on the jet, right down to, oh my goodness, the daughter, she missed her flight. Are we going to get a jet to her? There's numerous things they can do. So
I mentioned you're the president of BKD's family office. Again, some of the confusion in all this is the fact that you've got these sort of embedded family offices, you've got single family offices, you've got multifamily offices, all these terms that get thrown around. How do you serve families and how do you work with them?
The big issue is sitting down with the families and saying, what's your greatest issues? The key, and I think whether it be utilizing our services or any other firms, are they asking more questions or are they telling you more things? We see the best consultants to these family offices, to these families, is literally sitting down with them and asking some big questions of, what are your greatest concerns? What's your desire for legacy? 3 and 5 years from now, if you look back, what did you want to achieve with your family, and not just the money? Because you have intellectual wealth, you have the spiritual wealth in certain families, you have the charitable wealth, meaning what can you give back to the community? And we try to ask people the big questions about their big meanings in life. Because quite often it's a patriarch, matriarch that is getting up there in years and understanding their mortality and understanding that if I don't do something, this could all kind of go away. And I've missed an opportunity to make sure that I pass down my wisdom, pass down my heart to these next generations. And so from my standpoint, it is people asking big questions, then documenting, and then building a plan around it and beginning to try to execute on what their objectives are, versus somebody saying, you should have a family office and you should have a CPA or you should have an attorney in your office. Those statements usually are not about customizing around the family's needs and desires and their objectives. It's about kind of asserting, hey, this is what a family office should be for you. Well, they have the ability to customize this around their overall life objectives. And from my standpoint, it should be about them.
So how was that experience? Because I imagine that's having met you and worked with you, I've witnessed you do this, and you're very, I would say maybe an empathetic guy, because you can't lead with your own preconceived notion. It's really about, like you said, asking questions and helping maybe go through discovery together.
Literally, you have to have a high empathy. And I appreciate the nice comments, but I would tell you that your consultant, it's to me, it's implicit that they have empathy for you, have a respect for you and what you're trying to achieve. Because if they don't, they're not going to truly understand the essence of the family and be able to bring the other consultants, whether it be the CPA, the attorney, et cetera, that have similar understandings. It's great to have technical knowledge, but if you don't have empathy to go with the technical knowledge, it's going to have a somewhat of a static or a rigid feel to it that sometimes that doesn't pass on well to the charitable organizations, doesn't pass on very well to the next, second, and third generations. So empathy is a big part of it. And I would say the other quality of a consultant is agility, the ability to listen and say, not only what did you say, but what did you mean, and be able to pivot and maybe modify what we're trying to create for that family based upon the customized feeling of that family versus, hey, this is the box that you need to live in. And there's literally no agility. There's no empathy either, for that matter. So these families, it's interesting. We think of financial wealth as being somebody that is very, very smart financially. And interestingly enough, a whole lot of these families have an intelligence about finances, but in all truthfulness, they have creativity that is well beyond the ability to create wealth. It's their ability to bring it to the next level, because I think it's table stakes to understand finances. It's something extra. The people I've been able to engage in this realm is they have something that's above and beyond just the table stakes of finance. So you have to have the ability to understand it and be able to build around them.
A lot of times you would expect you'd have a certain level of financial acumen, I guess, but like you said, that really wasn't the skill or the thing that allowed them to accumulate the wealth and build the wealth or build the business. It's the other things.
It's some creative genius to them.
Right. Yeah. And so then you've got to be able
to build a wealth of 500 million and so on and so forth. And for that matter, 50 million, but 500 million and above, you have something special. Because for most of us, we would have quit at 5 million, 10 million, 30 million, whatever it was. But they've created a product. They've created a service. They've created something unique in the manufacturing process that's like, oh my goodness, it was a tipping point for them. It was well beyond the financial prowess. So.
Absolutely. So maybe again, I like to always look at different perspectives, right? Putting yourselves in the shoes of one of those individuals, one of those wealth creators, somebody that has that something special, and either maybe they have a family office or they're exploring. How can they figure out if they've got a right fit, or maybe if they, how someone can help them? Is there any advice you would have for somebody that's in that position?
I would tell you that beyond the agility and the empathy is the ability to the experience of working with these families. Because working with a $5 million, $10 million client is distinctly different because of the challenges as well as the things coming at these families. You talked about time. They've got numerous things coming at them, responsibilities, opportunities, as well as just desires because the financial ability to do whatever they want to do. And then transparency. Be looking for people that have the experience, the agility, the empathy, transparency, or the lack of conflict of interest. Conflict of interest is everywhere, no doubt. We all have our own self-centered interests, but there needs to be a transparency of what that conflict is. Because if somebody's approaching you, whether it be an attorney, CPA, investment person, and all they're doing is selling a product or a service, selling it to you, you need to run, do not walk. Because there is a financial spiff that they're looking for versus they truly have the empathy. I want to help you, and I don't care what service you need. I will go find it.
Yeah.
To me, it's a lot of very intangible things, but also you have the transparency, conflict-free. A CPA that literally is, hey, he's not selling partnerships or offshore trusts. He literally is saying, hey, what are your greatest needs, Mr. or Mrs. Smith, and let me help you build something around your needs versus me selling you a so-called investment product or a tax shelter or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, very, very interesting, very important distinction, because I think a lot of times there's the impression of maybe what you would have of what a financial advisor, or a trusted advisor, or a family office advisor would be, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's almost like I've got this image of like walking in with a blank notebook versus kind of the portfolio, right?
Yeah, if they have a short menu of services and they continue to point at their special of the day, kind of like at a restaurant, I'm a little bit hesitant at times for specials because it may be the meat that didn't sell 2 nights ago, or the seafood, as well as, to me, a white sheet of paper where you go, or a menu is a chef metaphorically is saying, hey, you tell me what you need fixed and I'll fix it for you. He's not trying to sell you the fish of 3 days ago.
Right.
And consultants should have an idea, and they can come up with, hey, here's some ideas. Hey, I can do this with lobster tail and filet mignon, metaphorically, so that you have an idea what their specialty is. But overall, a true consultant to these family offices should be, you tell me your greatest concerns and let me go out and help fix them. And they may not be a specialist in every type of area, but they should have what I call a Rolodex to die for of other consultants that they can pull in contact and say, hey, I've got a client that has a family member that has a specific addiction. Can you help them? And so-called the consultant might not make a single nickel off that, but their overall empathy for that family is, I want to help them, and I don't care if my Rolodex solves it. I want to prove my heart to them, my empathy, my expertise, my resources that I have.
Part of this, I would imagine, is a little bit of and I hate to put it to like the cost benefit analysis to a certain extent, right? Because of all these things you can simplify everything and automate everything, but then obviously there's a financial cost that comes with that. And so there's any insights on that, or again, how you would go about that process? Either you have a family office, you're curious about them, and how you can tailor that.
From a standpoint of expense, they are fairly expensive. I would say more and more are, but not necessarily high percentage, but are going to virtual family office. Do what you do best, outsource the rest, so that you say, okay, I can do this at one place, I can do this place, and then I can bring it all in some type of nice little tightly wrapped deal so that it minimizes cost. Having qualified experts at your beck and call can be expensive. And in all truthfulness, a well-run family office might cost a family $1 million a year. So it is a situation where, once again, customization and finding out what are your critical factors you want in that family office, and then what other resources do you need to bring, and then you determine, do I want to hire them or do I want to outsource them? And from my standpoint, you start slow and build around it, because particularly if a family has just gone through a large transaction and they say, oh my goodness, I've got this amount of money, do I need a family office? Start slow. What are my objectives? What are my greatest needs on a day-to-day basis? And you kind of slowly build the family office together based upon the needs, not only now, but of 3 and 5 years from now. So it is you know when you see it, you know what you need when you see it, and then you still say, do I really need the jet, or can I do NetJet? And maybe you do NetJet for a period of time, and then you eventually say, okay, I want a smaller jet. So on and so forth, and might need to buy one. And it really gets down to is need and wants. When you have the wealth of the family offices, there's a lot of gray area.
Sure.
I've seen where family offices, the G1, Generation 1, will so-called be really proud when they bought their first twin engine, and by the third and fourth generation, each family member thinks it's a family requirement to have a jet for that particular family unit. So it changes through the generations, changes through the years, based upon needs, wants, and financial ability.
Well, I think that's a great point that you make, that it is so multifaceted and multi-generational, and that there is, you talked about some of the complexities of just all the members of the team, right? And getting everybody playing at the same time and coordinated with a conductor. But then when you layer in G1, G2, different perspectives.
Different branches, you get cousins that have different perspectives. I would tell you that one of the best books to read, thinking of resources for family offices, is Strangers in Paradise. And it's Jim Grubman that wrote that, Grubman. But Strangers in Paradise gives people perspectives of how families deal with wealth and see wealth. And from my standpoint, before a family office family might go out and set up a family office, you might look and read resources whether it be the International Family Office, Business Journal, et cetera, or the Strangers in Paradise, is understanding not just wealth in general, but how do you internalize it and begin to do the research, do due diligence before you all of a sudden say, hey, let's go out and set up a family office. Whether you have a transaction of $50 million, $500 million, or $5 billion, walk before you run, because it can be an expensive endeavor, and it can be somewhat, I wouldn't say disastrous, but it can be a little bit damaging if you do it wrong right up front, and you have to undo and redo it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like an element of practicality there. Yeah. Walk before you run. Really good approaches. So as you've come into some of these meetings with families or even just wealth creators, and you kind of take that blank page approach, what keeps them up at night that you find when you're in some of these meetings? What are some of the things that come out of those, and then and maybe ways that a family office can help with it?
Probably the biggest is, will G2, G3, or will G3 or G4, the second, third generations take care of the wealth? And once again, not just the financial wealth, the intellectual wealth, the spiritual wealth of the patriarch, the matriarch that so-called created the financial wealth. And so what we see is their greatest concerns is, will my descendants take care of what we've so-called been blessed with? And if they do take care of it, they kind of like to have their thumb on a little bit of it, even from the grave. It sounds kind of odd, but they'd like to have a little bit of thumbprint on how they do it. So they're trying to build a culture within that family of, this is who we are, this is how we take care of our wealth, so that their grandchildren see this as a blessing, not as a curse.
Yeah.
So, also, I would say that they want to do right. They want to do good. And sometimes they're even confused because, once again, they've been so busy focusing on business and just throwing things over their shoulders as fast as they could. When they reach that 55, 65-year-old mark and they understand their mortality is, what is my legacy? And what good did I create? I see that kind of when you really get down to talking to these people, and it's no longer formal. It's a drink, an iced tea, and you're sitting back at the house in Aspen, and you're talking to them and literally getting real, getting authentic with them. Is they are just like everyone else, and they're realizing, wow, mortality's setting in. What's this all about? And how do I so-called help my children, my grandchildren, and my nieces and nephews take care of all this?
The emotional side, the what's going on between the ears outside of the intellect is really challenging. And you talk about some of the issues that come with wealth. I mean, there are just so many emotionally, psychologically that come with. Yeah,
it can be guilt. There can be excessive pride. There's numerous emotions, and going back to the consultant's ability to be agile. And being able to understand how each family member deals with that wealth. All these consultants should have all the technical knowledge or have it at their fingertips, but that agility and the ability to listen to not only what they say, but what they mean, and being able to understand that what one family member sees relative to their responsibilities of their wealth, it doesn't always transcend from husband to wife or from sibling or from cousin or G1 or G2 or G3. You have to be so listening for what that person views that wealth to mean. Is it a blessing or a curse, or is it just, wow, they have no responsibility whatsoever as a steward?
Sounds like some nuance in there that you got to really be watching for.
A lot of it.
So you talked about, again, keeping the open page, kind of helping ask those questions to kind of help identify some of the things, discover it, maybe even for the wealth creator or the family to know what some of those issues are. But then there's the executing on that, right? So it's one thing to have the creative idea, or the understanding of what's going on, but it's another to actually execute, getting things done. You're one that I've seen do that, and I admire that, because sometimes I will admit I struggle with that, right? We probably all do if we're being honest with ourselves. What are ways that a family office, or what are some best practices that family offices can take to helping on executing some of those things?
It's project management because life continues on and it comes at a fast pace. There's numerous opportunities that hit these families as well as distractions. Some of them are seen as opportunities, but they're truly just distractions. And project management and making sure there's open communication along the way. Hey, this is what we said, a year ago, 3 years ago, what your objectives were. Are they the same? And, get affirmation. It's their decision whether or not it's still a priority. Yeah. And then say, okay, if it's a priority, then this is what we need to get done. Is that right? And you're getting buy-in along the way, but you're making sure that they understand, you told me this, you asked for this, and now I'm delivering it. Is this, and quite often it is a situation where you're just reminding them of this is what we agreed to when we had clear minds and we didn't have all these distractions at us. Just good old project management and making sure you're tracking it. And then as well as telling them, hey, this is what we have achieved over the last 6 months, the last 3 years, or whatever the case may be, so that they appreciate it. Because once again, they're running fast as you are, and sometimes they forget. And project management, where you show the achievements, the milestones, quite often gives them a relief of, wow, I am making progress. Because once again, as they kind of so-called put their head down at night, they're just like everyone else. And okay, am I getting anything done? And so from my standpoint, the family office should all be about, not all about, but project management and helping people stay on task, make progress, make milestones, as well as making sure, are we still going the direction you want us to go out 3 and 5 years? Because it shouldn't just be all about today. It should be about, what are we trying to achieve 3 and 5 years from now? And that should be a continuum of 3 and 5 years all the time, if not further out.
It's funny because you're mentioning kind of just running fast all the time, right? And I know that you're a runner as well, and I know you've done marathons, at least one, right? Yeah. And kind of having a good running buddy is almost what I'm thinking of, right? That'll help you. Those days you don't want to get up early for that run. They'll take you out there. I think
that actually transfers into one of the terms that I ask all of our advisors, as well as myself, and I talk to other family office executives about, is that a good family office executive or an advisor should be thinking 3 steps ahead and walking 2 steps behind. And they should always kind of think in running buddy, and I've trained for half marathons and a marathon. And my best running buddy was a guy that always knew the course that we were going to be running in our practice sessions. And he always knew what turn it was, and it alleviated me of having to worry about it. And he didn't know it, and then so I run 2 steps behind. But from my standpoint, where the metaphor is the family office executive should be always have that humility of, this is the family member. And my intent is to make his run as easy as possible, but without leading him and pushing him. I'm just going to be there alongside him and talking with him, conferring with him, but always thinking 3 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead. Where do we need to go? And talking and saying, is this still the direction you want to go?
Absolutely.
So a running buddy is, to a certain extent, and sometimes it can be a friendly running buddy. Sometimes it can be a somewhat of a casual, not much of a friendship. We see, depending upon how the family member wants to run the family office or run their advisors, it can be very, very business-like, can be casual. I would just tell you, caution you against the too casual, because you still are an advisor. Yeah. You are not the family member. And I have seen family advisors want to be family friends, family too intimate. And at times, it can be a big disappointment to the advisor, but it's a detriment to the because it becomes too personal, and you're not looking objectively. Yeah. And saying, because you become, to a point, a yes man, a yes lady, and I think that's not what you're being paid to do.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Again, with the metaphor, right? If I become the yes man and you say, then you call me and say, hey, we're going to blow off the run today. I might be, yeah, sure, sounds good, but then we're not making the progress that we need to be making.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are maybe some other things, best practices, those family offices that you see that do it well? What are things that they're doing?
They're constantly strategic. They're looking out 3 and 5 years, and not just being, it's project management's great. Being task-oriented is great, but you have to be strategic too. You have to be saying, what is the family, and thinking back of 3 steps ahead, you have to be thinking, where is this family member taking this business or taking this family, and how can I come alongside them? But also thinking even further out and saying, if that's the case, where does this lead us? And being able to talk to the family member or the family council in certain cases and saying, if this is where we're going, here's what we need to be considering relative to technology, relative to communications, relative to family meetings, relative to charitable strategies in our estate planning, and making sure that they're coordinating all those pieces together.
Yeah.
And too often, a family office executive is task oriented, and they're not thinking far enough out. And before you know it, if you're running and you're just looking down at the pavement, before you know it, you're going to run into a wall, run into a street light or a mailbox or whatever.
Right.
So it's looking down the road and making sure you're thinking ahead on behalf of the family.
I've had a lot of conversations about family offices and what they are with families, advisors, and colleagues, and I found the explanation you just heard from Jack to be one of the best I've heard on how to avoid those proverbial mailboxes in the family office space, as well as how effective family offices, whether that be embedded, single family, multifamily, or virtual, can provide the important combination of assisting families to navigate the complexities that come with wealth, while assisting the family in setting and achieving their goals. As you might have gathered from our discussion so far, Jack is someone I've learned a ton from, and he's someone I think does an exceptional job of balancing the strategic and the tactical in his own life. Up next, Jack shares his personal approach on achieving this balance. Let's pick back up with how he came to work with affluent families in the first place.
I would say it's interesting is I gave a presentation here in Palm Springs here in January, and it was a 2.5-hour presentation, so I wanted to provide them some insight on who I was before I spoke for 2.5 hours to these families. And I told the story back in my high school days of taking a test that was supposed to provide you where your aptitudes are and where your interests are and everything. And it came back just off the charts. I was supposed to be a social worker, which, at that time, I was a poor kid in Chicago, and social worker was not what I was thinking. I was thinking about making money. And what was kind of interesting is I had an interest in Merrill Lynch at the time, and I got a job with Merrill, and it wasn't very fulfilling at that time. When so-called I had some success and everything, but I realized I wasn't doing what I really wanted to do. One thing led to another, and I understood that I needed to be more of a social worker for affluent and ultra-affluent families. And the way that is having empathy. Is they are real people, and they need help just in a unique sort of way. And so as over the last, say, 20, 25 years or so, I just saw myself as a social worker for ultra-affluent families to help them achieve their goals. And what's neat about it is when you're assisting a family, and I'm thinking of one particular one here 25 so years ago, is that she was highly charitable. And she gave several $1 million to a Kansas City Community Foundation. And I helped her build that charitable trust. And what happened was it built a good part of the Kansas City Library. I got to say, wow, I got to be a part of helping the community of Kansas City by my charitable strategies I presented to that family. And all of a sudden there was a leverage to it that I got to help more people by helping one family. Versus, just helping one family, just a leverage. I mean, we're in the accounting world and everything. Leverage is a big deal. Understanding how to utilize the specialties of other people to maximize your output. And I realized that by helping these families be charitable or to help their next generations, I was being a social worker to a large extent.
I think that's interesting, right? And again, playing to your strengths, so to speak, right? And finding that in the purpose and drive, you got to really.
It was empathy.
Yeah.
I do hopefully have empathy for every human being. Have more for others than some, but saying I want to help you. And I have technical expertise. I also have a group of people around me that have great technical expertise. What do you want to achieve? To me, that's the ultimate social worker.
Yeah.
So
what is that you do to successfully, again, kind of be strategic with building and growing and having that the creativity that you bring to your profession with the stuff that you do outside of the work?
I would say a combination, spiritual faith, that is the foundation of what I believe in, but it's also consistent. It manifests beyond the spiritual of always trying to be humble and being a learner, making sure that I'm not just saying, hey, I've got it all figured out and I don't need to learn anymore. Whether it be as a parent, as a business leader, et cetera, is making sure that you're constantly, using a Stephen Covey term, is keeping the saw sharp all the time. To also use another Stephen Covey term is having the end in mind. And I would tell you that is pretty well what, whether it be as a dad, as a husband, as a business leader, is what do I want to achieve when it's all said and done? When old John Henry put down his hammer and died, what did they say about him? I want to make sure that when I retire as a business partner here, or I get to be an old guy and my children talk about me, or my wife, that they say these are the qualities. And these came from actually a book that Lou Holtz wrote, former collegiate football coach. He wrote down his bucket list. And I want my bucket list to be not just things I'd done, but so-called things that people would say about me as a business leader or as a father. And so that I had that in my mind of what was the end supposed to look like, and then work backwards.
So how then do you do that? Do you Jack, I'm an accountant over, I'm a tax guy, right?
Yeah.
I think very tactically. Yeah. So what is it that you do? Because you mentioned, and I know you're a very, very busy guy, what's the mechanism that you do to make sure that you're always looking out towards the end is?
I wrote them down. I review them. I wrote them down in 1992. Still have them in a piece of paper that is on the same piece of paper. It's in a plastic bag where but my toothbrush. Okay. I glance at it every so often, and sometimes, I don't want the red Porsche any longer. But I do still want to, and I so-called check them off along the way. And really it gets down to is reminding myself who I am and where, so-called recalibrating my compass. And my spiritual faith is to constantly recalibrate and make sure, am I in line spiritually the way I'm supposed to be? And then everything else kind of trickles down from that.
Imagine you also remember when you made that list.
Oh, I remember exactly where I was sitting and everything.
Very cool.
And fortunately, a lot of it's come true. Some of it has changed, and some of it's yet to be achieved, and probably will never be achieved until I pass from this life. But bottom line is, I constantly remind myself of who I am, what I'm trying to achieve, because I don't want it to be so task-oriented that I get to the end of my task list at the end of my life, and I look back and say, yeah, but what did I get done?
Right.
I got these tasks done, but did I achieve strategically? Because we all should, just because you're strategic doesn't mean you're tactical. And just because you're tactical, you should be strategic. There should be a balancing act, and I try to do both. Yeah. With the intent of, hey, making sure that the most important people in my life see me a certain way, and that it's seen not necessarily from a presentation as much as just the daily life. Yeah. So just making sure that you're thinking long term and doing short term.
Well, and maybe along those lines too, something that you mentioned earlier that I think actually you embody very well, and I've seen you execute on, which is do what you do best, outsource the rest, which is not always a comfortable thing, and sometimes can go sideways if you don't do it right. So how do you manage that? How do you manage the outsourcing part and focusing on what you should be doing?
I mean, having your eyes and ears open and authenticity, as we were talking about earlier, is making sure that the people I surround myself with are authentic, are real people. That doesn't mean they're perfect, not even close to perfect, but they're just real. And when they're real, they tell you what their strengths are. And if I find that their strength complements my weakness, I'm going to have them help me, hey, how can you do this? As well as I'm going to offer my so-called strength to their weakness. And so you surround yourself with people that are trying to do life the way you're doing it, and you do it as a team. Whether it be your friends that you say, hey, man, I don't have wisdom in this part of my life. Can you help me with that? As well as then make sure you're generous back with any strengths that you might have that people perceive anyway. And you say, hey, I'm more than glad to help, vice versa. So you try to surround yourself with people authentic that complement your weaknesses. And then you just say, hey, throw it over to them. And then you have the grace. If they don't do it well, it's like, okay, that's not their strength after all. I'll find somebody else that can help me with it. So whether it be business partners or whether it be family or whatever, I try to make sure that I'm understanding where they're coming from and their strengths are, and vice versa.
Part of that is assessing your own and being comfortable with your own weaknesses, I guess. How's that been for you? I mean, is that something you're comfortable with even now?
I'm definitely working on them. Is that, I get too busy and forget about, doing things that, I try to be authentic, pretty well to have a daily ritual of trying to be authentic with myself. It tends to kind of trickle down and you become vulnerable to yourself. And you say, how do I improve on this? It's being that constant learner. I believe in you either are humble or you will be humbled. And whether it be whatever religion a person, most religions teach that. As humility is a virtue. And so from my standpoint is you're trying to always say, I don't have it all. Other people have what I could so-called utilize, and hopefully I have some things and you have that humility of, hey, we're all in this together. And my international travels around the world, and I say this international is, backpacking in Vietnam and being by yourself. There's a whole lot of times where you realize what weaknesses you have when you're by yourself in the mountains and you're like, oh, my goodness, I'm lost. Okay, I'm not a really good navigator. I better get a navigator with me. You find your fears. So you put yourself in situations or allow yourself to be put in situations where you are vulnerable. And it becomes a really a unique microscope.
But obviously, then it pushes you on to be able to do the things that you wrote on your list. Well, something I'll mention here kind of at the end, right, is that you're also the president of BKD Wealth Advisors, and I've noticed you haven't mentioned anything about some of the investment pieces with family offices as well. Is anything that you would mention on that, and I guess maybe why that hasn't come up until this point in time?
I would tell you that I appreciate you coming up with that observation, is that investments are a small component of taking care of a ultra-affluent family. Yes, it's an important component, but it's usually overemphasized. Sure. And so we try to underemphasize it because a family's wealth is based upon their intellectual wealth and spiritual and charitable wealth, et cetera. And financial wealth, it's just kind of table stakes to a certain extent. Yes, you have to manage it, but what we find is that families that don't successfully manage the other components of their wealth will lose their financial wealth.
Yeah.
But if you successfully manage your financial wealth and don't do the others, that's when it breaks down. Yeah. So to me, managing the financial wealth is overemphasized. So we try to underemphasize it. But yet, on the other hand, I just from a standpoint of advice for the people listening to this podcast is watch out for shiny objects. Shiny objects in the investment world tend to distract from the basics. And investments have, similar to gravitational force and physics, there are certain rules. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. 99.9%, kind of like gravity. Yeah. You drop an apple, it's going to fall to either. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And it's close to 100% of the time. And so from our standpoint, be very, very careful and listen for conflicts of interest when somebody's presenting something. Be very suspect, as well as then diversify. Obviously, there are people like Warren Buffett that didn't believe in diversification as much, and he's built a massive amount of wealth. Yet on the other hand, Warren Buffett is very, very unique and has intellectual capital that very few of us have. Yes, there are exceptions to every rule. There's, Tiger Woods, yes, he can hit a ball, so many yards, he can putt, so on and so forth. But I wouldn't rely on myself to be the Tiger Woods of finance or investments at any given time. And I would recommend our families diversify, look for, avoid shiny objects, that investment everybody's talking about. Bitcoin might be one. Years ago, it was CMOs. Oh my goodness, these are safe investments that yield well above average. And we know what happened in 2008, 2009. So from my standpoint, investment advice is use good common sense. Circle yourself around with very objective people, not just smart people. Smart people can also have conflicts of interest. Sure. Smart people that are objective and are looking out for your best interest, not their own.
So kind of closing thoughts here. We covered a lot of ground, which I appreciate. And we got the personal, we got the, right? Yeah. Just keep them coming here. Maybe kind of closing thoughts on what a family office is, kind of what that, again, in even if it's some of what it means for you personally and what that's been like.
It's a unique world. And there's just unique privilege, but yet unique challenge with working with these families. There's lots of fun stuff, whether it be invited to functions or interact on projects or just interacting with some financial geniuses that I've had the opportunity of interacting with and listening to their journey. It's interesting journeys and everything, but yet making sure you're stepping back and saying these are just people. Yes, these are unique, these are fun and everything, and making sure you're objective and saying, am I giving them good advice? And then on the flip side, the families is to have a sense of humility. I encourage them to quote Charles Koch, who I think the world of. He has a phrase that he lived under from his father, Fred, as well as now he is communicating this and has communicated to his kids for years and years, and it appears to be sticking very well, is the phrase, grateful for everything, entitled to nothing. Grateful for everything, entitled to nothing. And I believe that is a key, a very poignant phrase that all of us, whether it be consultants or whether it be the families we work with, if we can keep that in the forefront of our mind, it tends to keep us humble, keep us learning, keep us always having the end in mind, being as good stewards of the wealth, whatever wealth that is, and making sure that we have that sense of heart behind the financial dollar signs.
That's it for today, but if you haven't already done so, I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave Simply Tax a rating and review out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, as it goes a long way in both letting us know how we're doing and helping others find the Simply Tax podcast. Please also drop us an email at simplytax@bkd.com and let us know what questions we can help answer, and get in touch with Jack using the contact information available in the show notes of this episode. You can also find me out on Twitter, where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram, where I post about my life at the intersection of tax and being a dad at TaxDad, on YouTube, where we're now starting to share video content to help strengthen your tax mind, and out on LinkedIn. Until next time, I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.